Yep, go
10.
ahead.
Okay. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is Colby Sledge, council member for District 17. And if you're on the call, you probably know why. But it's for the basically first community review of the Wedgewood, Houston, Chestnut Hill, UDO, and zone change draft. So what we're going to be doing, I'm going to give a brief outline of what we're going to be going through on the meeting. The bulk of the time is dedicated toward Q&A. So what I want to direct you toward, because we have so many people on this call, the best way to do the Q&A, and really the only way, is there is a Q&A box at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx window. So if you'll type your question in there, I will be able to see that. So as I'm about to introduce planning staff, but as planning staff is going through the document, if there's something you see where you've got a question or something is unclear, throw it in that box. And then once we get to the Q&A time, I'm going to be compiling and getting those put into discussion so that planning staff or myself can answer. One note I will make is that there are, given the time limitation that we have, we might not get to every question, but the goal is getting to every question. And in fact, we're going to record all the questions, all the comments, and planning is going to post a PDF of those questions and answers to the webpage. So you should be able to get your question answered one way or another. Our goal, obviously, right now is to at least get all those in, and as many that we can get answered in at least a basic format is what we want to aim for. So real quick, for some of you who are on this, you may or may not have been involved in the big plan of how we all got here. So planning is going to go a little bit into that, but this is not the start of a conversation. This conversation has been going on for several years and has been community driven, which makes this product, as you're going to see, really exciting in the sense that the community, it responds to the community using tools that we have from a planning perspective. So again, if you've just joined, I know people were coming in. The best way to get a question answered or put a comment in is the Q&A box at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen. And I'm going to be compiling those as planning goes through the presentation so that we can, when we get to the Q&A section, then we'll be able to start getting into those. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Harriet Brooks. Harriet works in the planning department and has been working very diligently on this plan, and she's going to be able to walk through the document that you were able to see. And if you want to zoom in on this document, or you want to be able to follow along or look at a few different pages as we're talking, the best spot to find it is at whchstudy.nashville.gov, and that will take you to the page where all the documents are from the Wedgewood, Houston, Chestnut Hill study plan, including this very document we're going to go through. Again, that's whchstudy.nashville.gov. All right, Harriet, you want to take it from here?
Absolutely. Thanks, Colby.
Sure.
Welcome, everyone. We are so excited to show this work to you. As the councilman mentioned, it's been several years in the making, and so we are excited to kick off this public review period and start getting your comments and questions and concerns about the document so that we can be incorporating them. So as the councilman mentioned, I'll be going over doing a brief overview of the work, starting with the background in the 2019 study, talking about the zone changes that are happening in coordination with the UDO, and then also a little bit about the process and next steps, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. And before we get started, I just wanted to make a few notes of clarification. We've already started receiving a lot of comments and feedback, which is wonderful. We're really really excited to get it. I did want to note that there have been a lot of concerns about industrial and commercial uses, and I just want to put it out there at the beginning that we are not changing those. The zoning for those will remain the same. If you want it to be the same, we are not intending on changing the zoning of properties that are commercial or industrial or some of these or other non-residential uses. So I wanted to throw that out there. In addition, there have been some questions about the public engagement process in general. And so I wanted to note that this meeting is kind of the kickoff for the public comment period. We are really hoping that everyone will be able to download the document, read through it, send us your questions and concerns over the next couple of weeks. And then we'll be having another public engagement online meeting on January 12th at 4 p.m. where we will be reviewing a lot of the comments and concerns and questions that we have received, and then the appropriate steps that we're taking either in regards to the zone changes or the document to address those concerns. So please send us any questions or concerns you have. As the councilman mentioned, if we are not able to address it in the meeting tonight, we will be creating a very comprehensive document of the questions and answers that we've received. We will be recording everything, and we'll be sure to post that on the website as soon as possible. So let's get into the meat of it. As many of you are aware, because you participated, in 2019, a small area planning study was conducted for the Wedgewood, Houston, Chestnut Hill neighborhood. And this urban design overlay and the associated zoning changes really came out of that work. And so I just wanted to kind of take a minute and go back to that document to set the groundwork for how we got to this point, and why we're working with this UDO and this zoning. So the planning study argued that the need for UDO was rooted in two core concerns within the community. And you can find this on page 18 and key issues in page 22, the goals of the 2019 study. So one of those is affordability and displacement. So they found that the rising cost of housing in Wedgewood, Houston, and Chestnut Hill is displacing many lower and moderate income residents, and that's having a negative effect on the diversity of the neighborhood and the character. And then the second is the community character. And for this, they were arguing that the new development, a lot of it is really out of character with the existing built environment of the neighborhood. And so they're finding that this trend was erasing some of the really special sense of place kind of characteristics and qualities of the neighborhood. And that was something that the community really wanted to preserve. So towards the end of the document of the 2019 study and the recommendations and implementation section, two things were noted that are critical to our discussion tonight. One was the need to establish a design-based zoning district for character areas 2 and 3, which was South Wedgewood, Houston, and Chestnut Hill. And then that a UDO should be paired with these rezonings that are going to increase entitlements, because the UDO will really calibrate the massing and the scale of the buildings, because if the zoning is increasing the entitlements, we don't want that to mean that there are, massive multifamily buildings being built where the study actually said that they want to retain the kind of small scale neighborhood character. So the establishing the design-based zoning district, and then secondly, pairing that with a rezoning. That was our task. And so I just wanted to take a note to talk about urban design overlays and zoning, because I'm sure not all of you are planning nerds like some of us are in the planning office, and you might not be looking at UDOs every day. But an urban design overlay is a zoning tool that requires specific design standards for development in a designated area. And you'll see this picture on the right, you'll see a foundation of a building. And that's kind of how I think about the relationship between zoning and UDOs. When you look at the foundation of the building, you can kind of tell the use of the building, if it's going to be a house, if it's going to be maybe an apartment building, a commercial. That's the zoning. It's laying the framework or the foundation of what could go there. And then the UDO is really dealing with the form. How high is that building going to be? You can't really tell that from looking at the foundation of the structure, but the UDO really deals with some of those qualities and characteristics that really comprise what makes an environment, how we kind of live in it and feel it and embody it. So they work together. The UDO and the zoning work together. And UDOs in and of themselves do not affect the uses that are allowed or prohibited on a property. So there is a zone change that is going to be associated with this urban design overlay, since the two really kind of need to work together. And the zone change here is our tool for dealing with affordability and displacement. It's the zoning is really what allows us to increase the density that then the urban design overlay will kind of calibrate in terms of the mass and the form of the structures. So, so what we've done, as you can see on the left, there's a pretty light yellow. That's R6 zoning, which allows 1 unit per 6,000 square feet, or it's 2 units for the single family residential properties. What we've done is increase most of those to RM20A and S, which allows for higher density multifamily. But given the size of most of these single family residential lots, there's still just going to be about 3 to 4 units that would be allowed on these lots, or that would be appropriate. And then a couple of other things, you'll see that the zoning has changed to NS for no short-term rentals. You'll also see that the non-residential uses are remaining, something that I noted earlier. Your industrial, your office, all of that is still there. This is really looking at residential properties. And this comparison map is really just showing the change in the dwelling units. When the map on the left is the current R6 zoning, and then the one on the right is showing how many dwelling units per parcel would be available with the RM20 multifamily. And so you'll see with that kind of light periwinkle color that most of those fall in currently single family residential properties fall into that 3 unit place. So then we'll move on to talking about the urban design overlay. And as I mentioned earlier, this is paired with the rezoning to really get a handle on preserving that community character. Excuse me. So just for the table of contents, you'll see how the document is laid out. We start off by just kind of reiterating the 2019 study, and we go into guidelines that are for the entire UDO area. So those are things like landscape standards, things like lot aggregation standards, how we're dealing with driveways and parking paths and things like that. then the next section of the document kind of hones in on the specific character areas. And so in that part, we're really trying to calibrate it to fit very well and contextually within each specific neighborhood, corridor, or center. And then lastly, and this is a little new, you'll see that we have a section that's still dealing with different building types. And the reason for that is that we're really trying with this document to lay the framework for incentivizing small scale multifamily, and as a way of providing more diversity and an opportunity for affordability. And so, but those have to be calibrated really carefully. And so we have kind of laid out for each building type what would be an appropriate kind of massing or height for that structure. And then paired with the character area, you would utilize both of those tools if you're interested in a multifamily on a property that's currently single family. So this is, again, just the intro. It goes into the intention and the goals of the document, which are all really reliant upon the 2019 study dealing with those issues of affordability and displacement, and also community character, and trying to find a way to really incentivize the small scale multifamily as a way to kind of deal with each of those. On page 6 and 7 of the document, you'll have a little bit more of an outline of how to use the document and kind of the planning process. So such as when compliance with the UDO is required, how it works with overlapping codes and plans, such as if you have an SP on your property, or how it would work with the base zoning, how the base zoning and the UDO work together. And then the process of that you would submit a final site plan as kind of the same process that works for other UDOs within Metro. You submit a final site plan application that would be reviewed by the planning department, and we encourage people to contact Metro planning staff early for pre-application meetings, so that we can kind of work with you on either if you have physical restraints or other questions or concerns about the UDO or the UDO process. Modifications. So this, again, works like it does for other UDOs across Metro. The planning department staff may approve minor modifications. Major modifications will be considered by the Planning Commission. So then in part 3, this is really where we really get into the meat of the standards. So the UDO standards apply to all properties within the UDO. And like I said, these are dealing with things such as frontage, vehicular access, driveways and parking, bicycle parking. And the standards are very similar to what's found in other kind of residential UDOs across Metro. So vehicular access is relegated to alleys for properties that have alley access, driveway widths, and things like that. We're also dealing here with landscape standards, street trees and screening, how height is measured. So one thing that's a little different in this UDO than from some other UDOs is we have taken the framework from the contextual design overlay and are using that and how height is being measured. So height is measured from the average natural grade at the front of the property line to the roof ridge or parapet. But and you'll see this in when we get to the character area parts. But what we're going to be looking at is the height of adjacent structures and using a formula based on that to give a framework for height. Detached accessory dwelling units are going to work the same way as duplexes within the UDO. So DADUs shall comply with building type standards for duplexes. In part 4, we get into the character area standards, and as you'll see here, this is divided into the different character areas. And the character areas are generally the same as they were in the 2019 study, with a few exceptions. We did add centers at 2nd Avenue and Hart Street, and at 2nd Avenue and Chestnut Street. And so those are called out as separate character areas. And then we have Fall Hamilton, which is from Southgate to Wedgewood, Merritt Southgate neighborhood, so north of Southgate in southern Wedgewood, Houston, and then Chestnut Hill. And here in this table is where you can really start to see where we're trying to create a little bit of incentive for small scale multifamily. So the impervious surface ratio for multifamily is a little higher than it is for single family or duplex. The height that's allowed is a little higher than it is for single family or duplex. And you'll also see here under max height, where it says the average height of adjacent single family homes plus 5 feet would be the max height for a single family or duplex. And so what we're trying to do there is really start to make growth, or enable growth to be a little more gradual and to be more contextual with the existing fabric of the neighborhood. So similarly, for Chestnut Street and Hart Street centers, the impervious surface ratio and the height is even a little higher in these areas. You'll see that there's an added mixed use column because the neighborhood centers are intended to be mixed use, and so that use would be allowed here. And then also for the 2nd Avenue South corridor properties that are zoned residential. So lastly, we get into the residential building type standards. And this is what I was mentioning earlier that's a little bit different from what Metro has done in the past. And this is kind of laying out standards specifically based on building types, where we're really trying to calibrate the building type with what would be appropriate in each neighborhood. So the idea is that not every building type is going to be appropriate for every parcel. As we saw earlier in the density diagram, many of the kind of standard 50 by 150 residential lots are only going to be zoned for 3 units. And so you wouldn't see a small multiplex or a stacked fourplex on those lots. You could, people could potentially, aggregate 1 or 2 lots together, and then the standards change a little. But the idea is really to keep the fabric, the scale of a residential neighborhood, just adding density and adding some units, but of course that means the units are smaller. So you'll see here, in order to do that, we have minimum lot dimensions for each of the building types, the maximum number of dwelling units, and that's actually I wanted to bring that row up because that is something we've also been receiving some comments about, and it's probably going to be changed or calibrated So I just wanted to note that for everyone that's something that's currently on the table if you have thoughts. Minimum side setback, rear setback, height, and the floors or the stories. And then also the same thing for live, work, mixed use, and civic and religious buildings. And so that's really all I have in terms of an overview of the document. I did just want to reiterate for everyone the timeline and the kind of process over the next few weeks. So you have an idea of what's going on. The document was posted on nashville.gov last week, Wednesday or Thursday. And so please go there, download a copy, read it, mark it up, send us your comments. Today is the public review kickoff meeting. We'll have another online meeting on Tuesday, January 12th at 4 o'clock. And in that meeting, we'll be kind of reviewing the feedback that we got and the changes that we're making. The UDO and the zoning will be at the Planning Commission on January 21st. There will be a public hearing at Metro Council on March 2nd, and then the plan is to have it adopted on April 6th. So we know that's it's been a long road with this, but we're really excited. I know a lot of you are eager to get it adopted so that we can start really implementing it on the ground. And with that, I'd just like to say thank you and happy holidays. Here is another link of where you can find the document and also the email address where you can send us any comments, questions, concerns, feedback that you have after tonight. So thank you, and I will give it back to Councilman Sledge.
Great. Thank you, Harriet. I appreciate all the work the planning department and obviously all the folks who participated in this process we've gone through. So we're about to go into the Q&A session. A couple of notes if you've just joined or you joined sort of mid-meeting. There is at the bottom right-hand corner, a little question mark box that says QA. If you'll put your question in that window, the panelists can see those questions, and I'm kind of grouping them together. If we don't get to your question, all the questions will be answered and they'll be placed on a PDF on the site with the UDO. So what I want to go through very, very briefly is a couple of things. If you have a question about a specific parcel, a specific address, the best way to do that is to, and really the way that you've got to do it in order to get an answer that's specific to your parcel is WHCHUDO@nashville.gov. So WHCH, Wedgewood, Houston, Chestnut Hill, WHCHUDO@nashville.gov. So when you do it that way, you can ask specific address, the dimensions of your property, all that sort of thing. Then you're able to get specific answers on your parcel. So what I'm going to start going through now, there have been a couple of questions about how to do RM20 on a standard size lot. And when I say standard, the number that was brought up in a couple of questions was 7,500 square feet. So, and there was a question about, is that the minimum to do RM20? So could somebody speak a little bit to, because a lot of the current R6A lots or R6 lots in these character studies are around that size. And then once you answer that, could you also go a little bit into the substandard lot issue? Because we know that there are portions of this UDO that have a lot of substandard lots.
Hi, this is Harriet. Thanks. Joni, I was wondering if you could speak to the RM20 question.
Sure, happy to. This is Joni Williams with the Planning Department. So I noticed in the question box someone had asked about the minimum lot size for RM20 being 7,500 square feet. That is correct, that base zoning of RM20 requires that minimum lot size. And I think what we're honing in on is some specificity that we need to add to the UDO to clarify that the UDO would be tweaking that, or certainly allowing development of lots that are smaller than 7,500 square feet, whether they are currently non-conforming or would be changed into RM20 and not meet that 7,500 square feet. So I'm glad that question was brought up. It's certainly something that you will see us address in our tweaks and edits to the document through this process.
Great, thanks. And Joni, I don't know if you want to take this, Fredas. Could you give just a brief follow-up on the substandard lot issue?
Sure, absolutely. So one of the maps that we created as we were studying this area was a map of substandard lots related to R6 zoning today. I know there have been a few folks who've gone to the Board of Zoning Appeals to make it possible to build on those substandard lots. So if we need to clarify language, and I think we do, to address lots that would be that are currently substandard with their existing base zoning and may be changed to RM20, there are two ways we can address this. One is to have the UDO override the standards of RM20 in such a way that would make them compliant, that 7,500 square feet being one example. And then secondly, any modifications needed to the UDO itself in its applicability to a particular property would be going to the Planning Commission instead of the Board of Zoning Appeals. So that's a process difference for sure that we should highlight, that any modifications, well, I think you'll see in the UDO document, maybe you can go back to that, Harriet, that modifications for things that are less than 20%. So for instance, if your setback was requiring you to be at 10 feet, but you needed to be at 9 feet, those sort of minor modifications could be reviewed and processed by staff. Anything that would be a greater than 20% number would go to the Planning Commission. So that is a change in process. And I think we'll want to clarify in our edits the variations that we're making from that RM20 zoning, just to make it very clear the process that you would go through for tweaking standards within the UDO.
Got it. Thanks, Joni. So there have been a few questions regarding that are basically about the transition area. So in the study plan, there were transition areas primarily in what is being looked at as the Merritt Southgate area in the UDO. Can y'all talk a little bit about, there's been questions about rezoning or questions about what's the, what are the limitations or are there limitations? Can y'all talk a little bit about those transition areas in the UDO area?
Sure. Harriet, would you go back to the zoning page, maybe, the side by side? So I think a couple of things here to note. The zone change that's associated with the UDO is a direct correlation. So you'll see if your property is zoned CF or residential, whatever it may be in existing zoning, its companion zoning district is the same within the rezoning, within the zone change proposal, with the addition of the NS. So nothing is going from industrial to residential, nor is anything going from residential to industrial. Secondarily, I know there have been questions about the boundary for those sub-districts, and I think that's something we're honing in on. We were interested in including the industrial properties in order to give them the most flexibility for the future. And I think what we've heard just in the last couple of days is that they may wish to be out of the boundaries of the UDO and or out of the boundaries of this conversation entirely. So I think there will be some, maybe all, and that is a conversation for individual property owners to have with the council member, and we can adjust accordingly. But there's no intention to make industrial uses non-conforming or make industrial buildings non-compliant with the UDO, and we can do some cleanup in language there too. Councilman, if you want to weigh in on that, I don't want to speak for you, but that's just the perspective we're coming at with the boundaries of the UDO.
No, I think I think I'm generally in agreement there, and this is exactly what this conversation is for, so that we can come back and planning can go back and look at, okay, what do those boundaries look like, and based on our feedback, kind of what should they look like. I want to get a couple of quick questions that I think can be easily answered, and then we'll go back to a couple of some that have done that. Again, I will emphasize, if you've got a question about a specific parcel, the best way, and really the only way we're going to be able to address that from this point, is email on that address for that parcel to whchudo@nashville.gov. We're documenting all questions here, and all questions will be answered on the site. But if you've got like a specific address you're asking about, that's the best and quite frankly fastest way to get an answer. Somebody asked on the map the significance of the dotted lines going west of 2nd Avenue down 4th through Knowlesville Road. I think those are just marking the road. Is that accurate, y'all?
Yes, those are just marking the road. Okay,
I just wanted to be sure there. So I'm going to I'm going to try to go back. There's a couple of questions about affordability. And kind of how does this meet that? Because there's a reference to affordability and diversity of housing. So I want to take that a little bit just as a council member, because we have done a couple things over the years to try to address that. So what was said in the UDO planning processes and all this is that this was a concern of the community, of affordability of housing, different housing types at different price points. We in the council can't do much on that. Some of you may recall several years ago, we passed a bill. It was called Bill 133 because that was the bill number that talked about inclusionary zoning. In other words, setting aside a portion of new builds that would meet an affordability standard. The state preempted that. In other words, the state overruled us and said that we couldn't do that. So we can't address specifically the affordability within a particular parcel or unit or anything within Metro. The attempt to address the concerns within the community and the desire to see that potential affordability is through the diversity of housing and, quite frankly, through the density of housing. So that's why you see some of the tools being used here is to encourage housing stock that lends itself to a diversity of types and by sort of correlation price points, but then also just having more of it, just more housing, then increasing that supply. There also have been a couple of questions about what if I'm doing something ahead of time and I've already got a building permit or I'm already doing a certain thing. There was a question about short-term rentals. If you already have a short-term rental permit, you are grandfathered in. This doesn't change anything, and that is true for every non-short-term rental zoning or anything that we do as a council. You are grandfathered in as having those permits. Somebody also asked about a building permit. If they're already building, are they affected by this? No, you have a building permit, so you are operating under the zoning and the standards for which the building permit was submitted. So I want to get back to a little bit on a couple of sort of more technical issues. And I'm trying to scroll back through Well, here's a good one. There was a question about vehicular regulation. There are some curb cuts that are throughout the proposed UDO areas. How does vehicular regulation affect that sort of infrastructure? And I'll turn to planning for that.
Sure, I am going to the page, but Joni, feel free to step in while I get there. So the way that the UDO works is that compliance with the standards of the UDO are required when any property within the UDO boundary is redeveloped or vacant property is developed. So if you have a curb cut on your property, but you're not seeking a building permit or seeking or trying to go over any sort of renovation or that kind of thing, then your curb cut is good to go. The compliance with the UDO would only jump in once you are doing the sort of property that would require you to meet the compliance of the UDO. So when a building's square footage is being expanded, the expansion shall be in compliance with the UDO. When a new structure is built on a lot with multiple structures, the new structure shall be in compliance. And then when any property within the UDO boundary is redeveloped or vacant property is developed, then you would need to meet those standards.
Got it. Thanks, Harriet. Question about sort of the functionality of a contextual overlay. And Harriet mentioned previously about how this is sort of it's taking some standards from the contextual overlay process that we have or tool that we have, but also this is a UDO, and a specific urban design overlay. So the question was thought on limiting building height based on adjacent houses versus a fixed standard. Can you talk a little bit about the thought process that went into that?
Sure. So what we're trying to help here is, so back when the planning study was done, there were concerns that a lot of the new properties that are being built were not in scale with the contextual neighborhoods, and or the existing neighborhoods, excuse me. And I'll bring up Fall Hamilton as an example. So that's the area from Southgate to Wedgewood, west of Fall Hamilton School. And that area, a large majority of the parcels still have houses that are single family pre-1970, kind of small, very characteristic of Nashville bungalows. And we have seen, though, when some of those properties are bought and redeveloped, that substantially larger and taller and kind of massive residential properties are built in those places. And it really is not within the context or character of those existing kind of pre-1970s bungalows. And so the thought would be is not to, prohibit growth, but to more manage it in a more gradual and contextual way. So having the max height be the average height of your existing properties would allow for a gradual growth over time, potentially. And you'll see it's the average height plus 5 feet. So allowing for a little bit of growth, but not the kind of jump that we've seen in a lot of residential properties or residential neighborhoods across Metro, where you have some new development that's just really out of scale with the existing fabric of the neighborhood.
And there's a bit of a follow-up or a question that's linked to that will lead into a related topic regarding modifications. There was a question about, can additional height be considered through the modification process if it's permitted by the underlying zoning, or can an SP zoning achieve additional height?
I would ask Joni to speak to the SP part, but but yes, I mean, a modification, you can always talk with us about a modification request, and depending on the merits of it and how your specific site and those specific conversations, it could potentially be granted. Although the purpose of the UDO is really to try to we've worked really hard to calibrate these standards so that that what we've allowed or what we've set forth here is really what we see as appropriate for the neighborhood.
Joni, do you want to speak to the SP portion?
Sure, I'll just chime in with that. So the UDO, just in the interest of its name alone, as an overlay, or supersedes the standards of the base zoning district, whether that is RM20 or SP. So in cases where the overlay is being applied to property that's zoned SP, the more restrictive of the two would apply. I believe, Harriet, I think you have that in on the sort of process page also. So there's a difference there for sure.
And there's a bit of a follow-up to that, not really a follow-up, but a related question about the planning department's temperature on SPs versus base rezoning. Truthfully, the planning department may have a question on that or not. I will respond as the council member as to kind of where I see SPs versus base rezoning here. One of the things that we've gone through over the last few years in these character areas is several of you know, there are SPs that have been placed in both of these character areas. What has been occurring over time is some of those SPs, some of the standards you would actually find from a density standpoint are sort of incorporated into the rezoning thoughts and the feedback that has occurred from residents. However, I will tell you from a council member standpoint, and I think the department, well, I'll tell you what I hear from the department anyway, is that SP processes like that are very time consuming. They are more expensive for the applicant. And quite frankly, if we're trying to achieve the same goals from SPs that we can achieve through this process that's been recommended and set forth from a community process, that's where I trend, because there's an opportunity to set a standard so the questions, so that people know what standards are being made available. I don't know if Plain wants to add any more to that, but I just want to add that as a council member who has dealt with a lot of SPs over the last 6 years, that's kind of my take on the situation. And then there have been a couple of questions about, and sorry guys, I'm going through a couple of these and trying to make sure I've paired them up. There's been a couple of questions about process as far as like, what's the timing? How is the timing? How we got into this point? What's the timing going forward? The best resource on what the process has been to this point is the Wedgewood Houston Chestnut Hill study site, the page that planning posts, which is again is whchstudy.nashville.gov, and that will give you the full process of where this started. This started with actually a National Endowment for the Arts grant that the planning department was awarded, and it's taken several different pieces from that and in the community engagement process. So that's where that process is now. And then we've got some folks who are asking about how do I make sure that my question is answered. Just to repeat, all the questions and answers are going to be placed on that website that I just mentioned, whchstudy.nashville.gov. So all that Q&A will go in there. And then if you've got a specific question, or if you want to get more feedback, because that's been occurring, whchudo@nashville.gov. So that's where we're gathering all that information. And I'll get planning to confirm this, but typically what happens on something like this is the Planning Commission is provided with all the feedback on a particular matter before them. Is that accurate?
Yes, council member, that's true. So we will have all of this a couple of different ways. One, we want to be sure that we're addressing everyone's questions, acknowledging their concerns and questions. And so everything that's typed in the Q&A box tonight will be downloaded and addressed in and posted as a PDF on the website. Any emails or questions that are sent to any specific email address of any person or of the Wedgewood, Houston, Chestnut Hill, UDO email address, we will address those and provide responses. And then also, as this moves forward to the Planning Commission, all of those things will be compiled and shared with the commissioners for them to view and review, both the questions and planning staff's answers.
Thanks, Joni. So we've had a couple of follow-up questions on height. Height and setback. So there's a question about adjacent single-family homes, that definition, and does that include neighboring, what we call HPR, sort of 2-on-1 lots, or does it just include single-family houses on a standard lot?
So the way that it's currently written is that, and I'm going to go to this page, but it is so adjacent single-family homes are the most immediate single-family or duplex residence on either side of a property and across the street. And only 3 properties should be used for these calculations. So the nearest house on an adjacent property to the left, the nearest house on an adjacent property to the right, and the house most immediately across the street. Does that answer the question?
We'll find out. There was a question along those same questions about the house across the street affecting the front setback, and as it relates to that, if orientation, how does orientation affect that as well?
I'm not sure I understand.
Well, you're talking about houses across the street. Does a house across the street affect the front setback? And then if so, how does the orientation of that house across the street affect the front setback? For instance, if it's on a corner and facing another street.
Oh, I gotcha. Let me make sure that I get this right. So for corner lots, adjacency does include properties immediately across the public right-of-way from a side property line, if no adjoining parcels exist. So that does count as adjacent if you're on a corner property. We do have a note that, and it really the only designation was between MCSP streets and so major and collector street plan streets versus local streets. And so we do say that a primary frontage should be on a major and collector street if it's on a corner where there's one's a major and collector street and one's a local street. But if it's 2 local streets, then your frontage will, I guess, just be on the one that makes the most sense. Am I answering the question correctly? Or in a way that makes sense?
I think so, but if the person who asked the question in the box wants to follow up, we'll follow up too. Again, the main thing here is to get general questions and which these are great questions. General thoughts, questions, concerns, suggestions going, because again, full record of this will be posted and the planning department's going to be working through each one of these. So Harriet, that's the great initial answer. And then if there's follow-up, the follow-up will occur. And again, everybody, you can follow up whchudo@nashville.gov. There was a question about that related to detached accessory dwelling units, put as garage apartments, talking about why not change the current zoning rules to allow garage apartments on everyone's property. I know that detached units were addressed in here. Can y'all talk a little bit about those? Harriet or Joni?
Oh, yeah. Yes, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, so in terms of the UDO, detached accessory dwelling units, since they are an additional dwelling unit, they are dealt with the same way as a duplex would be. So that's actually a little bit, in most cases, there's no I guess no additional restrictions. They're the same as the single family for the most part. So you'll see on this page actually the ISR for a duplex is the same as a single family. The height restrictions work the same way. So it's really just saying that in the case of this UDO, we are considering a detached dwelling unit because it is a dwelling unit as such, as an additional dwelling unit. So it would be treated the same way as a duplex.
Got it. Going through trying to make sure I've got I'm trying to group these. All right. The questioner said they're going to follow up with a screenshot to y'all about the setbacks. So
okay, great, and I appreciate that. I just wanted to say we hear you, and I am happy to see that example, and we can definitely talk through it, and we might need to add some additional language to the UDO or make an edit accordingly. So thanks.
Yeah. Great. Couple of questions there's a couple of opt-out questions, and then I'm going to go back to a couple of the design questions. So opt-out, in all overlays I've been a part of, and it's been several over the last few years, it goes back to what we talked about earlier about determining the boundaries of the UDO. Now remember, these boundaries were set on character plans plus the transition areas that were adjacent to those character plans that were primarily residential, but following the study plan from 2019. My experience has been in overlays that they have to be contiguous. And so, in other words, if there's something that's on the edge, for instance, a parcel, then there is a consideration to be made there. There's not really a consideration to create like a donut hole, essentially. And I'll speak primarily to what I've experienced in conservation overlays, that they have to be contiguous. I will say this too. These study plan areas, the boundaries of the study plan areas were established from the 2019, what the Planning Commission approved in 2019. And then in that study plan was made the recommendations about contextual infill UDOs. And Harry, if you can go, there's reference pages within this UDO document that tell you which pages to refer to in the study plan. Again, everything, all these documents are on whchstudy.nashville.gov. So that's where you'll see the study plan from 2019. That's perfect. That map on page 4, that's the map that comes from the study plan. And then I think you were going to go one more, Harriet, on the reference points.
Yeah.
But the reference points are there to point you toward, hey, here's what there we go, page 95 and 98 on the design-based zoning district, how the UDO should be paired, the key issues, the goals. So all this refers back to those previous ones. I do want to talk through a couple of questions that we've gotten on height, and specifically on height on single family. Harriet, can you talk a little bit regarding how that number was arrived at? What does that typically mean or look like? Maybe that's the best way to put it.
Sure.
And while you do that, one clarifying question, because somebody's asking about force. There's a thought about forcing single family. I want to tell you, there's nothing further from the truth on this UDO. The zone change that's associated with this UDO upzones all residential properties beyond single and two family. So when you're looking at that chart and seeing where the existing zoning was R6 or R6A, depending on where you are in the UDO plan areas, all of that is being upzoned. So there's been a little bit of confusion, I think, about, oh, these certain areas will only be allowed to do single family. In fact, all the areas will be allowed to do multifamily. So that's the change. That's the major zone change in the residential areas. So I don't want that to get lost, because that's a huge piece of this. So just want to make sure I address that, because I think there were a couple of questions in there that maybe were a little bit off track. Harriet, on the height of single family homes.
Sure. And I mean, I'll just totally echo that from the councilman. Really what we're trying to do is incentivize the multifamily. So if you're reading through this and finding, seeing something where you feel like we're really missing the mark, or that there's something in here that's not doing the job that way, please send us a comment and let us know. So in terms of the height, and I'll tell you kind of my analysis process for how I did this. So I actually went through all of the residential properties in the UDO at the spreadsheet in GIS, and did some measurements of what the heights are and the setbacks are on all the existing buildings, and then tried to work working both with the parcel size, the height of the existing buildings, and then trying to create a sort of formula that incentivizes this kind of contextual or gradual growth that doesn't allow something that's really massive or out of scale. Tried to come up with a formula for height and setback that would kind of reach that threshold. So that's where we get the average height of adjacent single family homes plus 5 feet, 2.5 stories max. So the idea was that you would go to this page, find out what neighborhood or what character area your parcel is in, see that height, and then you would go to the building type standards page. And depending on if you're trying to do a triplex or townhouse or a single family, you would pick the building height, and then you pick the more conservative of those two, and that would be your height. And generally, we're talking about the difference of a few feet when you do look at the building types that fit within, or that either are restricted or totally open for a character area, and then the height that's given here in this max height category. They're pretty corollary. They work fairly well together. But the idea is really to incentivize gradual height increase over time, density increase over time, but at that same time, really working to maintain the character of the neighborhoods.
Got it. Thanks, Ed. Question of that relates to the contextual overlay piece, or I'll say contextual process. It said if a property owner wants to build a new single family house and there are tall houses, so let's say, well, just put it the way the questioner put it, tall houses on both sides of them, as well as across the street, will they be forced to build a tall house?
Oh no, you don't have to. That's just your height limit. That's as tall as you would be able to go, but you could build a single story house if you wanted to.
Got it. Okay. There's a question that came in about parking. It said, can you discuss why there is more parking needed for denser development? In other words, what are the parking requirements for those? Why are the parking requirements for denser developments what they are?
Sure. And I'll say on that one, that is something that is not totally in planning's hands. A lot of that is determined by Public Works. And so we understand, that as a neighborhood becomes more walkable and more dense, that maybe there's less of a need for off-street parking. However, Public Works is still requiring parking minimums, and so that's something that we just have to abide by and include in the plan. So we're not trying to provide any more parking than is really necessary or is required, but we do still have to meet the standards of the minimums that Public Works set, and so that's what you'll see in here.
Got it. What I'm going to try to get to, there are a couple of questions that have been a little bit repetitive from what we've mentioned before, so I'm trying to find one that's a little more, that's something we haven't addressed already. While I do that, a couple of just notes for if people joined late. I'll talk through, there was a question about sort of process and how much time we have to discuss. So Harry, can you go back to I think it might be the last page, the one that walks through the schedule as far as public hearing and public comment? Great. Okay. So on this, so I'm going to note this, and everyone who is on this call will receive a meeting invitation to this next meeting, which is Tuesday, January 12th. It's also at 4 p.m. Where all the input that's come in, plus whatever input has occurred over the next 4 to 5 weeks, is going to get put together, analyzed, come back. You'll see what was discussed, what changes. We'll have more questions. What I want to emphasize here is the number is kind of where we are in this public participation process. The Metro Planning Commission is also a public hearing. I want to make sure that everybody knows that. My expectation is that we will still be meeting digitally, that the Planning Commission will still be meeting digitally. So I do want to make sure that everyone understands that that is also a public hearing as well. And then you can see between that period and public hearing at council and potential council adoption, there's another 2.5 months. So for those who are unfamiliar, bills like this can be amended or adjusted through the third reading. There's 3 readings at council. So just be aware that this process is still ongoing and is the result of literally years of community process so far. So that's, I want to just get another kind of process clarification there, is that this is, again, a step in that public communication process. Also, I believe the notice cards go out to everyone affected in these areas. Those notice cards should be hitting mailboxes, if not today, in the next couple of days. Those notice cards are for the January 21st Metro Planning Commission. I'm obviously putting in my newsletter every week, hey, here's when the meeting is, here's how to sign up, all that. So there will be that same process done for both the 12th and the 21st. A quick note on that. Somebody asked, is March 2nd first reading? No, March 2nd is second reading. The second reading is the public hearing. First reading is typically pretty perfunctory. So at council, and I think the first reading would either end up being, I want to say it's probably the first reading in February, the first meeting in February, but we don't discuss that first reading. So that's why it's not on this sheet. So March 2nd is the second reading of 3 at Metro Council. So I think that's, so there were a couple of questions about who else to communicate with. You can obviously email me as well. I will stress once again, whchudo@nashville.gov gets directly to the planning department, directly on a question that you might have, especially on a particular parcel. You can obviously feel free to copy me or send me an email. It's Colby, COLBY, at nashville.gov. Sledge is S as in Sam, LEDGE. So yes, you can feel free. There will be some times where I'll be able to give you an answer based on maybe the process or the schedule, but a lot of times the fastest way to do this is going to be going right to the planning department.
And Joni and I are getting all those emails directly.
Great. Yeah. There was a question on a definition of, it's a little technical, so I'll try to make sure I get it. And I just lost the question. It was about what's defined as a half story. If that makes sense. There were some references, I think, to 2.5 stories.
Sure. Joni, do you want to answer that one as an architect?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I think while we see a lot of new construction in this area that has flat roofs and is a more contemporary kind of aesthetic, that is more typical with a half story is more typical with a sloped roof. And so the goal there is to provide additional living space above the 2 stories, but within a sloped roof form. So that would be considered 2.5 stories.
Got it. Thanks, Joni. There were a couple of questions about the term ISR. And Joni, you might want to take this too. I don't know. There were questions about sort of what qualifies, whether it's pervious pavers or portions of the building. Can you give an overview of ISR?
Sure, I'll take that one.
Okay, thanks, Harriet.
So ISR is impervious surface ratio. And that is something that is actually outlined in code. And that impervious surface ratio is basically just you add up all your impervious surfaces. So usually it would be your roof area plus any hardscape. So driveways or concrete pads, walkways, and then divided it over the entire area of the parcel. And I'm not sure if it's water services or code. Sorry, I'm relatively new to Metro. But they do have kind of explicitly outlined how certain things like pervious pavers count within that range or within that calculation. And if anyone is interested in that more, I'd be happy to send it to you if you just send an email to whchudo@nashville.gov. But impervious surface ratio, you add up your impervious surfaces and then you divide it by the total area of your property.
Great, thanks. There was a question about who the community stakeholders have been to the process. Easiest thing I could point you to is the study plan. The study plan has the UDO task force, or not UDO task force, excuse me, the study plan task force. And then obviously there were public meetings held that were open to the full public, and the task force kind of helped, the citizen resident task force helped in that process with the planning department. So again, that study plan, just like all the resources, whchstudy.nashville.gov. There's a couple of questions. It's a process question again, and I'll try to address it generally, is about what's called pending legislation. So pending legislation is essentially what the status of a project is or process is when something is pending legislation in the council. So typically what that means is, and I'm not like Metro legal, but this has been my experience in the past with overlays, is that when an item has been through a public hearing and then has been through a reading of council, it then enters into that pending legislation status. So what that means is if you were to pull a building permit at that point when it's in pending legislation, codes, it's not planning, it's codes, would see, hey, there's pending legislation, this permit would potentially be held to the new standards. That, of course, is all dependent on whether the legislation goes through. If the legislation went through, it would be held to it. If it didn't, it would not. So I don't want to get too far into what's kind of a legalese, but that's a couple people had asked about pending legislation, so I want to make sure they knew. There's a question about a steering committee meeting after the charrette. Yes, a steering committee meeting actually happened just, I think, 10 days ago, I want to say. So around that period, so the steering committee looked at this document first. They presented some feedback, some questions. Planning has been working through those. Some of those you actually see reflected in this document. So yes, the steering committee has met and they've reviewed this. So yeah, again, I know that there are some more specific parcel specific questions. So I've tried to go through basically everything that I could find that I could sort of group up. And so we've got all that. What I'm going to do is turn it back over to planning, and we're going to move into sort of the conclusion period. You'll probably hear the same email addresses and process again, but just making sure that everybody is aware of it. And then please, you will get an invitation, but please mark that Tuesday, January 12th date. And that will help out, to get questions answered, get considerations, whatever might need to be done between now and then. So Harriet, I'll turn it back to you, or turn it back to Joni.
Great, thank you. Yes, please mark your calendars for the January 12th meeting. It'll be at 4 p.m. It'll be a WebEx meeting similar to this. Please also take some time, if you're able, and go to the website, download the UDO document. We also have the zoning comparison maps on the website. You can also find the 2019 study on the website. If you want to go back and review kind of what the objectives and recommendations were from that to see how we got to where we are today. And please send us your feedback, concerns, comments, edits to WHCHUDO@nashville.gov. So Wedgewood, Houston, Chestnut Hill, UDO @nashville.gov. I'm receiving those emails as they come in. Joni also has access, so we'll be taking a look. We will be posting answers to all of the questions that we received tonight, not just the ones that we were able to answer in the meeting, but all of the questions. We'll be we'll be creating a document and posting it in the same place on the website. So you'll find kind of our FAQs there. In addition, as we mentioned earlier, all comments received via email, either to us directly or to the Wedgewood Houston Chestnut Hill UDO email address. Everything that we receive will be compiled and will go to the Planning Commission. So we want you to know that your voice is being heard, and we really are excited for you to take a look at this. And we're also very excited to hear any more comments or questions or how we can make it better. So thank you and happy holidays.
Thanks, Harriet. I want to make one quick addition. You can see this meeting. This meeting is recorded, and so you can see it at the Metro 3 YouTube page. I just wanted to reiterate that for those who came in afterwards. So if there's something you want to refer back to in that process, it should be posted. They tell us in the next 2 to 3 days, so it'll be up there. So, but yeah, I want to echo what Harry said. Happy holidays to everybody, and look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks, all.
Thank you.